Nazis just days ago. So, when that day comes, what does that mean for Coca-Cola? It means sugar rationing and other restrictions. Restrictions that'll curtail our profits, our revenues, even our ability to produce Coca-Cola. That's what happened in the last war.
Okay, we get it. We get it. War would be bad for business. But it's not as if we can do anything about it. We're a soft drink manufacturer.
I disagree. We can do something. The thing is, wartime rationing only applies to non-essential products. Therefore, we need to convince the government and the military that Coca-Cola is a wartime necessity. We need to show them that Coca-Cola boosts morale, that our drink improves worker productivity. We need to convince them that Coca-Cola is integral to the American way of life that our troops will be fighting for. The executives dismiss Ollert's plan as crazy talk. But a year later, the telegram from the Associated Press in London arrives. After seeing that plea, some in Coca-Cola think, maybe, just maybe, Ollert's scheme isn't so crazy after all. And then comes the clincher. Early in the war, the British invaded Iceland to make sure it didn't fall into Nazi hands. But now, the U.S. has agreed to take over the task of protecting the island. And shortly after the American troops arrive in Iceland, the U.S. War Department orders 100,000 bottles of Coca-Cola for the troops stationed there. That order convinces the entire company that Ollert's onto something. In the months that follow, Coca-Cola builds ever closer ties with the U.S. military. It strikes a deal to supply Coca-Cola to military bases in the Pacific. It gathers endorsements from commanding officers who prefer their troops to unwind with a Coke instead of beer or liquor. And the company makes a bold promise to the military, too. It will provide 5-cent bottles of Coca-Cola to U.S. troops wherever they are in the world, no matter what it costs the company. Step by step, Coca-Cola's getting ready. Ready for war.
On December 7, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards.
December 1941. America is still reeling from Japan's surprise strike on Pearl Harbor, but the federal government is wasting no time. Just 6 days after the attack, the government imposes tough limits on the use of sugar in the production of non-essential goods. It's the moment of truth for Ollert's plan. Can he convince Washington to exempt Coca-Cola from the sugar clampdown? In meeting after meeting in Washington, Ollert makes his case to bureaucrats and politicians. They send him packing. He gets a Coca-Cola executive appointed to the War Production Board, but even having a man on the inside doesn't help. Ollert even takes his campaign all the way to the office of the vice president, but the answer's still the same. No. By spring 1942, the impact of the sugar curbs are already showing. Coca-Cola is now in short supply throughout America, much to the annoyance of millions of cola guzzlers. For Coca-Cola, it seems a disastrous situation. But then, Ollert spots a loophole in the sugar restrictions. The rules only apply to products made for civilians. If Coca-Cola makes its drink for the military, then there's no limit on the amount of sugar it can use. Coca-Cola wastes no time in exploiting that loophole. It steps up production to meet the swelling demand for military training camps. It starts shipping Coca-Cola to troops stationed all over the world. But that's easier said than done. Coca-Cola has to fight for shipping space that would otherwise be used for guns, munitions, and other military supplies. And then there's the problem of how to get all those empty bottles back to the U.S. for refilling. It's a logistical nightmare. The cola's getting through, but barely. But Coca-Cola has a 5-star fan. General Dwight Eisenhower, the supreme commander of Allied forces in North Africa, guzzles Coca-Cola. He wants the troops to enjoy the drink too, and he hits on a solution. Eisenhower asks the Coca-Cola Company to send its people to the battlefront to build bottling plants that can keep the cola flowing. Dozens of Coca-Cola engineers head to North Africa to build those plants. Coca-Cola's people even follow the troops as they fight their way up the leg of Italy, dishing out bottles of cola between the firefights. For the troops, the arrival of Coca-Cola is a taste of home in a foreign land. As U.S. fighter pilot Robert Scott wrote in his memoir, God is My Co-Pilot, if anyone asked us what we're fighting for, we think half of us would answer the right to buy Coca-Cola. And for the people those Coke-swigging GIs liberate, Coca-Cola becomes a symbol of hope. Coca-Cola might not have been popular in Europe before, but it certainly is now. Why, it's the sweet taste of freedom. Pepsi can only watch all this unfold from the sidelines. When Pepsi President Walter Mack learns about Coca-Cola's military deals, he asks the Pentagon if Pepsi can get involved too. Mac, we don't need Pepsi. We've already got Coca-Cola, and that's the drink the troops want. We don't need the hassle of two cola companies fighting over shipping space. Coca-Cola is winning the loyalty of millions of U.S. troops around the world. Troops who will one day return home as committed Coca-Cola drinkers. Pepsi finds its market trapped on the home front, where ever tighter sugar quotas are slowly squeezing the life out of the company. Pepsi is losing the gains it made before the war. Mac knows he has to score a source of sugar, or Pepsi will fade away. So he does the only thing he can do. He plays dirty. Tremaine Lee is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and host of the podcast Into America from NBC News and MSNBC. As a black journalist, Tremaine has covered social unrest in the name of racial justice before. This past week, Tremaine pushed deep into the racial inequality and violence that was smoldering in this country long before we ever learned George Floyd's name. On Into America, you'll hear his conversations with the movement's biggest thinkers and activists, including Nicole Hannah-Jones and Don Cheadle. Tremaine sat down with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison and Representative James Clyburn to help put this moment into context. It's a moment that is affecting us all, so Tremaine also engaged in discussions around white allyship and how to talk to children about what they are seeing in the streets. This special collection of 5 podcast episodes is titled Into an American Uprising. Search for Into America wherever you're listening right now and download to listen.
Hi, I'm Robbie Damon, host of Wondery show Imagined Life. Each week we take you on an immersive journey into the life of someone you may think you know, before the whole world knew their name. There will be clues to your identity along the way, but only at the end. But can you really imagine?
When Pepsi boss Walter gets off a plane into a warm breeze with palms swaying, he's not thinking of aquamarine waters, fine rum, or casinos. No, he's here on business. The worst kind, taxes, Cuban taxes. He goes to the office of the tax collector, who suggests they discuss the problem over lunch at a restaurant. Mac is eager to get to the point. We've been paying our taxes as agreed. I don't understand why you're demanding we pay more. The Cuban taxman smiles and snips off the end of a cohiba. Maybe the tax demands we sent before were incorrect? Doesn't matter. You still must pay. We've noticed that you've been improving your sugar plantation. Damn right, thinks Mac. Pepsi purchased the 40,000-acre plantation in 1939 to feed its growing need for sugar. But when Mac visited it for the first time, he was appalled. The plantation workers had no fresh water. They didn't have any land to raise livestock to feed themselves during the months when there was no sugarcane to cut. So, Mac sent engineers to drill water wells and open a community farm for the workers. The taxman pauses to light a cigar. After a few puffs, he continues talking. Those improvements, they're ruining Cuba. What? How can improving the lives of your people, Cuban people, ruin Cuba? Now, the peasants on other plantations want the same things they see on your plantation. Our economy is all about sugar, Mr. Mac. You're giving the peasants another way to make a living. You think they're going to keep breaking their backs cutting sugarcane now you've given them a choice? The taxman puffs his cigar again and cuts to the chase. You know, if those wells you drilled got sealed up and that farm got shut down, then maybe the $9 million your company owes us could be forgotten. Of course, $9 million is only our initial estimate. Maybe if we look again, we might find that the real amount you owe is much higher.
Much higher.
Mac clenches his fists beneath the table. The tax man is giving Max a clear, odious choice. Shove the plantation workers back into a life of misery, or pay endless extortion taxes to the Cuban government. Mac can't stomach either option, so he sells the plantation. Losing that land is a serious blow for Pepsi. Wartime rationing means the company can no longer import its Cuban sugar. Mac was going to sell that sugar and use the profits to offset the rising cost of doing business during wartime. But now, that plan has lost its fizz. Plantation isn't Mac's only problem. He's also got to do something about Coca-Cola, which has positioned itself as the patriotic cola. Pepsi now needs to show America that it too supports the troops. But that's easier said than done when the U.S. military won't buy Pepsi. Pepsi starts by overhauling its logo. Its new look is a circle divided into bands of red, white, and blue to mirror the colors of the stars and stripes. Next, the company opens Pepsi Cola centers for servicemen and women in San Francisco, New York, and Washington, D.C. Designed to be a home away from home for service personnel, the centers offer showers, cheap meals, and free Pepsi. There's even a booth where the troops can record voice messages for their relatives and sweethearts. Pepsi presses each recorded message onto a phonograph record and mails it to the intended loved one. Within weeks, thousands of those records start arriving at homes across America. Heartfelt messages from homesick soldiers, sailors, and airmen who hope this won't be the last time their loved ones hear their voices. One recording is sent to a house in the very birthplace of Pepsi Cola, New Bern, North Carolina.
I never knew I'd talk like this before. If we had ever fussed, I could turn and say that this is one time you couldn't come back at me. Since we didn't, I'll say that I'm missing you more than ever. And I'm hoping the day will hasten when we can be together again.
There's another unusual thing about Pepsi's centers. They're integrated. The military might be segregated, but Pepsi's centers are open to all races. Mac's a liberal Republican, and since taking charge of Pepsi, he's been using the business to put his beliefs into practice. Most of corporate America, Coca-Cola included, acts as if the nation's 12 million African Americans don't exist. But not Pepsi. It's even created an African American marketing team to build Pepsi sales in black communities. In an era of Jim Crow laws, this is bold stuff. But not all of Pepsi's bottling plants share the vision. In 1940, when the company's first black salesman arrives at the Pepsi bottler in Birmingham, Alabama, the plant's white owners made their views plain.
We don't want you here. Your advice can't do us any good. I know a black businesswoman who won't buy ice from the black company next door to her because she thinks the white man's ice is colder.
But the sharp salesman wins them round with his retort. All that story tells me is that this white man's the better salesman. Despite the resistance from some bottlers, Pepsi's African American team makes a big difference. African American stores ditch Coca-Cola to make way for pro-equality Pepsi. Black people switch from Coca-Cola to Pepsi to show their support for the company too. Within a few short years, Pepsi is well ahead of Coca-Cola in sales to African Americans. But those gains aren't enough. By 1943, the rising cost of bottles, sugar, bottle caps, and gasoline forced Pepsi to raise prices. The cost of a 12-ounce bottle of Pepsi rises from 5 to 6 cents. The price hike kills the company's successful "twice as much for a nickel" slogan. Within weeks, sales of Pepsi are down 20%. And Mac is under pressure. He's got to find a way to get more sugar to Pepsi's bottling plants, or they'll go out of business. Luckily, Mac's got a plan. He heads to Mexico City to do a deal with Mexico's sugar producers. Mexico's got plenty of sugar, but there's a catch. Mexican law prohibits its export. Mac can buy all the sugar Pepsi needs, but he can't get it across the border. So Pepsi builds a plant in Monterrey, a city close to the U.S. border. That facility will turn Mexican sugar into Pepsi syrup. And since Pepsi syrup isn't technically sugar, Pepsi can export it to the U.S. Within days of the Monterey plant coming online, trains loaded with thousands of barrels of Pepsi syrup start crossing the border. The syrup arrives just in time for Pepsi's hard-pressed bottlers. Soon after the Monterey plant begins operating, Mac gets a call from a U.S. federal official.
Mr. Mac, we understand Pepsi is importing sugar from Mexico. You should be aware this is illegal. You must stop immediately.
Mac plays it cool.
I'm not importing sugar. No, I'm importing Pepsi-Cola syrup. There's no law against that.
You might not be breaking the letter of the law, sir, but you are certainly going against the spirit of the law. We're at war, Mr. Mac. This is no way to support your country.
Mac leans back into his chair and puts his feet up on his mahogany desk.
Well, if our great nation is really running that short on sugar, I'm happy to help. Under the contract I have with Mexico's Sugar Cooperative, they will provide 40,000 tons of sugar a year. I'll give that contract to the U.S. government, if you can bring the sugar into the country.
Yeah, you will? Well, send me a copy of the contract, and I'll look into doing just that.
A few days later, the official is back on the phone, and he's furious.
Damn you, Mac. You knew that Mexico forbids the export of sugar unless it's part of a finished product. You can give us the sugar, but we can't get it out of Mexico.
Well, if you can't get the sugar out of Mexico, and if you can't stop me from importing our syrup, I guess you need to get the Mexicans to change their law.
The official slams down the phone. He knows he's beat. With the government unable to stop Mac's plan, that Mexican syrup keeps Pepsi going until the end of the war. But while Pepsi survives, the war has taken its toll. Pepsi's price hike has killed its sales momentum, and soon, millions of veterans, now loyal Coca-Cola drinkers, will be returning home. In the next episode, Pepsi sees a future in the baby boomer generation and confronts Coke with a challenge that catches the company flat-footed. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Business Wars. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. Just tap or swipe over the cover art. You'll also see some offers from our sponsors. We hope you can support our show by supporting them. Now, if you like what you've heard, we'd love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Another way to support us is to answer a short survey at wondery.com/survey and tell us what Business War stories you'd like to hear. And a quick note about the conversations you've been hearing. We can't know exactly what was said, but this dialogue is based on our best research. I'm your host, David Brown. Tristan Donovan wrote this story. He's the author of Fizz, How Soda Shook Up the World. Karen Lowe is our senior producer and editor. Jenny Lauer is our producer. Sound design by Bay. Pepsi's head of global operations, Don Kendall, scans the room. It's July 1959, and he's at a reception in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Kendall's waiting for the right moment to approach the guest of honor, Vice President Richard Nixon. Tomorrow, Nixon will be showing Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev around the American National Exhibition. The exhibition is a showcase of all things American. It's designed to ease tensions with the USSR and show the merits of capitalism. Nearly 450 American companies are showcasing their products. Pepsi wasn't supposed to be here. The U.S. government invited Coca-Cola. But Coke wants nothing to do with the USSR, not after years of being vilified as capitalist dogs. So like many Americans in the 1950s, the State Department opted for the next best thing and invited Pepsi. Kendall thought this was a fantastic opportunity. His bosses disagreed. Eventually, they gave in and let him go to Moscow.